I remember the day everything changed with crystal clarity, as if it were etched in the very fabric of my soul. I was sitting at my desk, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead mingling with the distant chatter of colleagues, when the email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read simply, "Restructuring effective immediately." My heart raced as I opened it, hoping against hope for some semblance of good news, but the content sent a chill through me. It was official. I had been let go. The company I had dedicated years of my life to, putting in countless late nights and sacrificing family time to climb the ladder of success, deemed me expendable with a few clicks of the mouse. In 48 hours, I would no longer be a part of the staff that made up this corporate machine. I had been replaced not by a better employee, but by a line in a budget sheet. As I emptied my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. A pungent cocktail of emotions brewed within me: betrayal, rage, and a bone-deep sense of injustice. The senior management had thrown away my contributions like yesterday's news, showing no regard for the blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into my work. My dedicated years had been reduced to a single email, and it felt impossibly cruel. I was not alone in my turmoil. Around me, I saw the faces of colleagues who were equally blindsided. Many had probably received their own pink slips, but none of us spoke about it openly. Instead, we glanced at one another with sorrowful eyes, each grappling with our own sense of loss, the gravity of our shared fate binding us together in our uncertainty. My mind wandered to the memory of late nights meeting deadlines, strategizing sessions that stretched into the early hours of the morning, and the friendships I thought I had built over the years. I recalled the countless moments of laughter shared during coffee breaks, the supportive pat on the back during tough times, and the collective cheer when we succeeded against the odds. They had been my family, my work family. And yet here I was, tossed aside and forgotten. As I made my way to the exit for the last time, a cocktail of anger and resolve began to simmer in me. They might have taken my job, but I was done being a victim. As I stepped into the cool afternoon air, I felt a surge of purpose take hold. Revenge wasn't just a plan for me, it was a necessity. I would not simply fade into the background. Instead, I would become a force to be reckoned with, and I would ensure that those who had wronged me would know the name they had cast aside. In the days that followed, while the world around me rushed forward, I took a step back to reassess the terrain. I wanted to understand what had driven my dismissal, what machinations had taken place behind closed doors. My mind replayed the final months leading up to that dreadful moment, the whispers of discontent, the unyielding push for profits above all else. I began to connect the dots. Management's decisions were driven not just by numbers, but by power grabs and personal vendettas. Within the company, the air had been thick with tension. I started to hear the tales of backstabbing and manipulation among the upper brass. I realized they had become so consumed by their ambition and greed that they were willing to sacrifice anyone they deemed a threat. It dawned on me that I was not the only one caught in their increasingly ruthless game. Others had been victims too, losing their positions and their lives while the elite feasted on their blood. It was time to build a plan that would exact the kind of vengeance these people deserved. I was meticulous. I wanted the kind of payback that would make an impact, a ruinous reveal that would shake the very foundations of the company's leadership. I envisioned a complex strategy that would weave through the gears of this corporate machinery, playing it against itself. As I laid the foundation for my payback, the seeds of an elaborate scheme began to sprout within me. I started rekindling old relationships, reaching out to former colleagues, those who had experienced similar betrayals and had been cast aside like so much refuse. We all had different reasons for feeling wronged. I encouraged them to come together, uniting our stories over the shared smoke of corporate deception. I remembered Malcolm, the quiet genius who had been marginalized by his superiors and pushed into early retirement. There was Sarah, the office manager who had devoted her life to the company, only to be let go without a second thought, while a much less experienced candidate took her place. And then there's Lisa, my former mentor, who had been unfairly demoted because she questioned the ethical ramifications of their aggressive cost-cutting measures. Each friend had their own pain, their own reasons for wanting to strike back against the system that had turned on them. With every coffee meetup and phone call, I gathered information, piecing together a legislative quilt of indignation. I created a private group dedicated to documenting the grievances we had all endured, sharing our stories, and listing the internal scandals that had been swept under the rug. The more we collaborated, the more I sensed the tide starting to shift, but I had to be careful. This wasn't simply a game of vengeance in the traditional sense. I wasn't just seeking revenge for me. I was going to unveil the hypocrisy of the company and its management. They needed to be brought to the light, exposed to the public, shamed for their actions. But executing this would require precision and timing. an intricate dance with potential dangers lurking behind every corner. As the weeks faded into each other, I watched the patterns of the company unfold like a prismatic code. I observed the daily rituals of the remaining employees, watching from the sidelines as they worked tirelessly under the thumb of those who had cut off my future. It was a grim reality that drove my resolve deeper. I wasn't just a former employee, I had become a vigilante of sorts, holding firm to my righteousness even as anger flared within me. My strategy began to take shape. I gathered not only records of injustices, but also evidence of questionable practices by management, policies that contradicted the company's supposed values of integrity and transparency. I built a narrative, a tapestry of narratives woven together with the threads of truth, and I intended to unleash it at the right moment. Then came the fateful evening when I realized the time was right to reveal my hand. After weeks of research, I invited my allies over to my house, a clandestine meeting in the shadows of our shared fury. I had painstakingly collated each individual story, binding it with the insidious truths of the management's dealings. I brought laptops, documents, and spreadsheets, proof of the rot that plagued the company from the inside out. As the door clicked shut behind my allies, I could feel the heavy atmosphere build around us. We shared our stories, recalling the dismissive attitudes we had faced, the backhanded compliments that hid a seething disdain, and the waste of potential lives crushed under the merciless weight of bureaucracy. I felt an energy crackle in the air, a potent mix of camaraderie and shared purpose igniting the discussion. With every passing minute, I outlined my plan to expose the company, the who, the what, and the how. Social media would be our megaphone, a means of amplification that they could never hope to control. Armed with indisputable evidence, we would become whistleblowers, using the digital age to turn our petty corporate grievances into a public outcry. Yet, unbeknownst to my former colleagues, I held another layer to my plan, one that layered a personal vendetta over our collective grievances. Months of neglect had turned into a burning ash of resentment. I could not ignore the treachery that had been inflicted upon me. The power brokers who had betrayed me would not walk away unscathed, not when I had a plan that would make sure their names were synonymous with poor leadership and unethical practices. I opened the floor to my allies, encouraging them to share their insights for what we could reveal. I watched their faces closely, ignited by the feelings of injustice as they began to brainstorm what stories would impact the most. Together, we were forging not only retribution for ourselves, but a movement that might unseat the toxic culture permeating the organization. The night faded away into early dawn, our laughter and brainstorming mixing with the light of new possibilities. It had started as a story of personal vengeance, but now it had transformed into a mission that transcended my own pain. It had become about justice for all who had been silenced. Everyone who had suffered at the hands of these corporate tyrants would finally have their voices heard. I spent the nights drafting plans, crafting narratives fortified with corporate facts and personal testimonies. I knew that for every story we spread, 1,000 echoes would follow. These stories would bleed into the corporate air, spreading through the arteries of employee networks and flipping the script on their orchestrated facade of success. They had to face the consequences of their arrogance and incompetence, and I would be the harbinger of that reckoning. As I prepared for the reveal, the thrill of anticipation coursed through my veins, mingling with the darkness that had been festering within me for so long. I was no longer just a spectator, I was a puppet master. I could almost hear the quiet whispers of vengeance promising a reckoning, a financial devastation that would strike at the heart of my former employer. The wheels were set in motion, and nothing could dampen the fire within me. Yes, the wages of corporate betrayal wouldn't just bring them to their knees, it would forever alter the landscape of their carefully cultivated facade. The sun was beginning to rise on a new era, one where the echoes of our pain would resonate within the walls of their office, where silence would become an anthem of accountability, and I was prepared to lead the charge. I was ready to unleash the storm, a storm that would engulf the very organization that had uprooted my life, and I couldn't wait to see their downfall unravel before my eyes. As I settled into my routine, the initial thrill of returning to my family business began to fade, replaced by an undercurrent of discontent that I could no longer ignore. It wasn't long before I found myself ensnared in the toxic web of office politics, a world I had hoped to escape when I decided to join my father's enterprise. In theory, family should mean support, loyalty, and unity. In practice, however, I found only a breeding ground for resentment and division. Every day, I would walk into the office with an open heart, eager to contribute my ideas and breathe new life into the long-standing company. Yet the enthusiasm I brought with me was met with skepticism, perhaps even hostility, from my uncle's loyal following. My uncle, the one who had taken over the helm of our small empire while I was off pursuing my own dreams, had entrenched himself in the role of protector of the status quo. His closest colleagues viewed me as an intruder, someone who posed a threat to their carefully arranged circle of power. Toxic politics reared its ugly head almost immediately. Meetings became battlegrounds. I would present what I believed were innovative ideas designed to drive growth, yet they were routinely dismissed. My uncle's closest ally, a man named Greg, was particularly adept at undermining my contributions. "That sounds nice in theory," he would say, wearing a condescending smile that made me clench my fists under the conference table. "But we tried something similar 5 years ago. It didn't work then and it won't work now." And there I would sit, trying to mask my disappointment, while Greg beamed with satisfaction, his words striking a blow to my credibility in front of the very people I was hoping to inspire. Nepotism was woven deeply into the fabric of our workplace, a secret that everyone seemed to acknowledge except for my uncle, who blissfully operated as if it didn't create rifts among us. His favoritism toward Greg and other longtime associates left little room for newcomers like me, despite the fact that I was armed with fresh insights and years of successful experiences to share. The perceived loyalty within this inner circle perpetuated a cycle of mediocrity. They had no interest in considering my perspective, and they were determined to maintain power, despite the signs of struggle the business was showing. In the backrooms of our establishment, whispers turned into a symphony of conspiracy. "What's she even doing here?" I would overhear one of Greg's confidants saying over coffee in the break room. "She thinks she can just waltz in and take over." I felt like an outsider trapped within a family I was desperately trying to reclaim. Their scorn was evident in every sidelong glance and every huddle they formed just out of earshot. As weeks morphed into months, the incidents of exclusion became more blatant. Team lunches would be organized, excluding my name from the invitation list. It was an ice-cold slap that thrummed with intent. I wanted to scream, to confront them about their lack of professionalism, but fear gripped me. Would I be throwing gasoline on an already raging fire? I couldn't walk into the room and demand they recognize my presence, especially when my uncle, the overseer of it all, seemed utterly unfazed by my plight. Then came the moment I most feared, the theft of credit. I had worked late into the night on a proposal that I believed had the potential to rejuvenate our waning client base. I had studied the competition meticulously and realized we were about to lose a significant account. I presented my proposal with excitement, prepared for a wave of enthusiasm. And while there was a brief flicker of acknowledgement, within a week, Greg came forth with what he claimed was his own idea, polished to perfection under the same banner I had crafted. In a matter of days, I watched in horror as he garnered accolades and praise from our clients and my uncle alike. It was as if a cruel prank was being played on me. I sat helpless watching Greg bask in the glory of someone else's pain. "You did great work out there, Greg. Really revived that account," my uncle exclaimed, oblivious. My heart sank deeper. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, and I could only muster a weak smile, pushing down the rage that boiled within me. I had felt the warmth of triumph when I crafted that pitch, yet now felt the chill of betrayal permeating my very soul, like ice scraping against my insides. My colleagues began to change as well. Those who had initially greeted me with congeniality now turned, putting up walls. Conversations ceased the moment I entered the room, laughter stilled, ideas shared only among select individuals. I felt the isolation permeate through every space I occupied. I needed an ally, someone I could trust amid the deceit, but as trust eroded, so did any hope of support. The culmination of all these injustices was the straw that finally broke the camel's back. During a crucial quarterly meeting, all eyes were on Greg, who had managed to charm our clients and deliver profitability numbers despite my efforts being in the shadows. My uncle had called on him to present results, and I remember feeling a mixture of disdain and sadness as Greg stood there full of bravado, going through slides I had helped create, albeit without credit. When my uncle turned to me, however, it ignited a spark of hope inside. "What do you think? Should we continue to pursue these avenues?" he asked, expecting me to deliver a booming endorsement. Instead, I hesitated. The air crackled with tension, all eyes on me like vultures circling their prey. I had become the punching bag of this family feud. I should have said yes, relinquishing my disappointments for the sake of peace. But I felt a burning indignation surge through me. "Actually," I started, my voice trembling yet resolute, "I believe we should reconsider our strategies. I have some alternatives based on my research that could generate a better client response." Greg's eyes narrowed, his moment of glory threatened, and a wave of panic rippled through me. I pressed on, buoyed by the fire slowly igniting within. If we truly want to recuperate our position in the market, we need to innovate from within, not recycle old ideas that worked only because they were familiar. My uncle's face contorted into an expression I couldn't quite read, disappointment or affirmation. It didn't matter because Greg played his hand deftly. That's brave of you, but you really think stirring the pot is the solution? We can't afford to gamble right now. That was the final straw. My previous hesitations were washed away by the rising tide of anger. I tried to articulate my thoughts, to explain how vital innovation was to our survival, but I was met with collective resistance. I could see my ideas dismissed before they even formed, drowned under a sea of defensive maneuvers. I was the odd one out, voicing fears that no one else seemed to recognize. With every passing moment, I could feel my spirit wane further, sunk by the weight of their dismissive judgment. Their reactions only fueled my frustration, transforming my hurt into something sharper, more dangerous. I began to navigate through the all-too-familiar territory of betrayal. It wasn't only my ideas being crushed, but my very belonging to this family, a fight that seemed endless and tragically intricate beneath the surface. The blood was thickening, nourishing the seeds of vengeance planted deep within me. I couldn't ignore the injustices that had pervaded my life. They had waged war on my dignity, my ambitions, and now I could feel the perfect storm brewing within. Would I allow their malignancy to swallow me whole? That was out of the question. If they insisted on playing this Game of Thrones, I would have to reclaim my rightful place one way or another. I had finally understood what needed to be done. They might have the upper hand now, but I wouldn't go down without a fight. The time had come for me to take control of my narrative. I would no longer be a victim stale and stagnant, but rather become the architect of my liberation and the harbinger of their shocking awakening. As I left the meeting room that day, I could still feel the prickling weight of their disdain pressing against my skin, their laughter echoing in the hall. But a new determination surged within me, bringing clarity amid the tumult. Plans began to form, slowly coalescing in the recesses of my mind. I was done being the punching bag, and the next act would bring a reckoning, a moment that would send ripples through the family business and shake it to its core. They had underestimated my will and the power of my drive for justice. From that moment, I knew I was about to spark a revolution from within, a revolution ignited by the very injustices I had endured, the fractures they had created. The fire was kindling, and with that came an exhilarating thrill. I would ensure my story was told, and payback would be my next chapter. For years, I had gone about my life believing I was a mere cog in the vast machinery of corporate enterprise. An employee who played by the rules, meticulously following the chains of command and earning my way through the typical bloody grind. I was a sales manager at a mid-level tech startup, pushing through presentations and proposals, selling dreams packaged in shiny hardware and beautiful interfaces. But beneath a calm surface, there was a brewing storm, a tempest of hidden power, buried deep within the confines of company contracts, patents, and loyalty from clients that ran deeper than blood. It all began innocuously enough. My career choice had been practical. After all, corporate life seemed safer and more promising than running a small design company alone. But as I climbed those monotonous corporate ladders, I realized I was not just a sales manager. I had become a master of connection, a weaver of relationships who knew how to pull the strings. The real game had nothing to do with the product or the technology. It had everything to do with the alliances I built. That was my power. My first insight into this hidden power arose during a high-stakes project with a longtime client, a tech startup developing cutting-edge AI. It was a challenging bid, weighing heavily due to corporate politics and the constant competitiveness in our industry. But through the months leading up to the proposal, I garnered their unwavering loyalty by being their shoulder to lean on, their sounding board in strategic meetings, and occasionally their confidant regarding issues our competitors were too ensnared in ambition to recognize. During each brainstorming session, I carefully adjusted my sails, letting my clients' ambitions and frustrations shape the direction of my corporation's offerings. I was good, but it was not just skill that secured our success. It was the network I knitted, executives who'd share setbacks over coffee, developers who reveled in swapping ideas over lunch, and finance managers, realizing the strategic advantage of retaining a seller who was attuned to not just their needs but their dreams. But the life I had built felt precarious due to the internal discord within the company. I sensed the waves of volatility each time the CEO belittled my department or when ambitious colleagues saw me as an obstacle. I could feel the looming betrayal from within. The hand that feeds can also bite. I gathered my network around me as I often did, subtly drawing information, building rapport around mutual sympathy. Loyalty was a currency more valuable than any financial contract. It made men and women prepared to take risks for one another. Yet the illusions I held of the company's long-term success shattered when, during one particularly long afternoon, I caught wind of an imminent betrayal. My own boss, a man I had once respected, planned to cut my team and sell off the projects to a competitor, cunningly framed under the guise of corporate restructuring. The merciless decisions taking shape boiled down to cold spreadsheets and bottom-line maneuvers that would sacrifice our hard-earned relationships for a quick profit. I felt my heart wrench with anger, the ghost of betrayal already tightening like a noose around my throat. It was more than just a decision, it was personal. Were my sacrifices for nothing? Did they really think they could discard me so easily? Age and experience had taught me many lessons, but this betrayal was the first I took personally. In that moment of emotional chaos, my hidden power whispered sweet nothings into my ear. It urged me to act instead of despair. Keeping my emotions at bay, I took a moment to breathe. Revenge didn't have to be reckless. It could be strategic. I began mapping out my plan, intricately weaving the threads of loyalty and my knowledge of legal documents, patents, contracts, and negotiations. First, I needed to secure loyalty. I needed to ensure that my clients knew about the impending threats that could undermine their businesses, and that knowledge would deposit me firmly in their minds as their protector, a gargoyle watching over their interests in an impending storm. There was the AI client who had trusted me after months of collaboration. I digitally scribbled down their contact, then another, our newest client in the automotive sector, whose initial investment with us was fraught with doubts but had solidified after witnessing the returns thanks to my persistent faith in their vision. I reached out to all of them one evening, candidly whispering the sentiments I believed to be true. I didn't need to embellish my fears, merely hinting was enough. Things are uncertain, I would say, each conversation taking a clandestine tone. Be careful with your partnerships moving forward. You want to maintain control over your innovations, and it might be best to review your contracts. As each call wound down, I equipped them with the tools to protect themselves and gently outlined how my means of guiding their successes made my department the best ally they could have moving forward. With each murmured warning, I felt a surge of my hidden power. The lure of loyalty swelled within me, and I knew I was no longer merely an employee. I was building back a fortress against my impending betrayal. I was crafting a network of allies, sacred bonds built on shared fears of loss, of being discarded ruthlessly like a mere number in a bottom-line chart. But I had to be strategic. I needed more than loyalty. I traced my fingers across the blueprints of our contracts, recalling my time spent within the legal archives of the company. I knew the various clauses embedded in our partnership agreements, the patents I had helped to secure for pivotal technologies. They were now tools I'd wield rather than just pieces of paper protecting the embarrassing failures of others. Within the contracts was my best-kept secret, detailed rights regarding intellectual property emerging from the server. If my team had been eliminated, the knowledge accumulated over countless nights of brainstorming and development would be open for unilateral control by the ownership of the parent company, and they had made their intentions clear. Patents held a certain power of dominance, and they were mine to steer successfully into the storm's eye. The instincts honed from years in corporate trenches urged me to act. The next morning, I embarked on an adrenaline-fueled journey through corporate labyrinths, accessing the unmonitored company files. Within a day, I had made copies of every crucial document, the client agreements, intellectual property filings, and internal communications that cornered the CEO into knowing served the interests of not just one man, but our entire relationship-based economy. I organized them meticulously in folders highlighting passages that could be beneficial. Knowledge, I knew, could be dangerous, and if I found the right leverage, it could be turned to empower those who had always stood by me, the ones to whom I remained loyal. I would be the mastermind pulling the strings, orchestrating a grand display of justice that leveraged my hidden power against betrayal. As days rolled into weeks, I concentrated on the minutiae of winning my loyalty battle while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Colleagues went about their day, ignorant of my machinations, while I cultivated the very alliances I sought to strengthen. Coffee breaks were laced with carefully selected anecdotes that hinted at my growing suspicions about job security, planting seeds of doubt in what loyalty truly meant. After all, they too were in the line of fire, though they chose to ignore it. I immersed myself in the weeds of my strategic planning, integrating a multi-stage approach. First, I needed to establish a consistent line of communication. Then, using the faith I gathered from client loyalties, I would initiate a renegotiation of vital contracts that secured our partnerships, all while hinting at the notion of collective legal counsel from trusted attorneys. Finally, I would gather testimonies and experiences, bombarding the CEO with unsatisfactory performance measures that hinted at the ultimate failure of leadership accountability. The execution of this plan unfolded organically, each moment pulling another thread out of an ever-widening tapestry of betrayal. I knew the tide would become hostile, eventually surfacing with my name whispered audibly through the closed doors of management meetings. But the power I had woven around myself in the form of loyal allies would only strengthen with every passing confrontation. Then came the day that events took a decidedly darker turn. Out of the blue, the CEO called for a company meeting. Word spread that it was a discussion of budget cuts. The timing couldn't have been more unsettling or more convenient. I readied myself, weighing each anticipation against the backdrop of my carefully assembled army at my back. As everyone gathered in the cramped conference room, I steadied my breath and prepared to navigate the unseen tension rising. The scene unfolded like theater. I could sense the vulnerability hidden behind the CEO's mask of arrogance. It began with a recitation of performance metrics, snaking through areas of eliminated processes, each stack of data carefully crafted to justify the necessary sacrifices. My heart raced not out of fear for myself, but from excitement for the flawless execution of my grand scheme. As I raised my hand and questioned his figures, honing in on discrepancies I had surveilled closely, I threw in the legal context, casually reminding the room of community agreements barring justifications without prior cultivation of feedback from the personnel who'd worked tirelessly for year after year. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. My allies flanked me, loyalties pledging to lend their voices to every rising crescendo, and in that moment I felt invincible. The power of patience and planning built silently behind me urged another wave of shock, the looming threat of my looming vengeance as each segment of data unfolded into discontent. The murmurs grew louder and shifted into disapproval. I remained composed and strategically carefully navigating chaos that had begun to invade our discussions. Every decoded phrase, laden with righteous indignation, propelled them deeper into the teamwork I had nurtured. They recognized the brewing shift, a cataclysmic crack in our structured hierarchy, and they began to speak out, demanding recognition and justice, knowing exactly how to contextualize their needs. As I stepped back, cloaked in the success of my endeavor, hope emerged like sunlight through rent clouds. My months of strategic planning and intimate knowledge of corporate deals manifested before my very eyes. Loyalty transitioned from a hidden asset to an immeasurable weapon. In the end, vengeance would not only tread upon the path of anger, it would weave itself intricately into the fabric of strategic compromise, artfully restructuring our very foundation. And perhaps in navigating this storm of betrayal, the hidden power of resilience etched alongside loyalty would always reign victorious. They may have tried to uproot me. They may have aimed at cutting me off, but I would make it my purpose to turn the tide, assembling words into justice, not just for me, but for every soldier standing alongside me. That morning in the meeting had been born from necessity, but it replayed in my mind repeatedly, a theatrical display of hidden power laid bare. It was not merely a battle. It was the dawn of strategic revenge that had begun to reveal itself. Each calculated move was constructed on the foundation of long-held loyalties. Each echoing voice became part of a symphony demanding to be heard. This was my hidden power, and I would mold it into a strategy that bent the very will of betrayal to my advantage, executing a plan that no one would see coming. And in reclaiming that lost integrity, I would expose the festering underbelly of deceit hiding in plain sight, while ensuring my revenge was served cold, calculated, and irrevocably just. I knew that the moment had finally come. The culmination of years of suffering, humiliation, and betrayal would unleash itself in a wave of calculated revenge. The weight of the past pressed heavily on my chest as I prepared to strike. As I sat in my meticulously organized office, I could almost hear the echoes of the laughter that once resonated through the halls of our family company, the laughter that had turned into whispers of conspiracy and betrayal. I could not let their treachery remain unpunished any longer. The plan was simple yet devastating, extending like an intricate web of deceit ready to trap those who had wronged me. I had spent countless sleepless nights mapping out the intricacies of corporate hierarchy, identifying allies and enemies alike. Eli, my once beloved nephew turned usurper, had been the catalyst for this entire scenario, a betrayal that morphed into a deep-seated vendetta. He had wormed his way into our family company and convinced the board that I was incapable of leading. How ironic that the very individual I had nurtured would be the one to stab me in the back. Weeks passed as I orchestrated every piece of the puzzle with surgical precision. The first step involved secure communication with our most trusted investors, those who had remained loyal despite the internal turmoil. They trusted me over Eli, knowing the potential disaster he represented. During a well-placed boardroom meeting, I had Kaysen, my loyal confidant, propose a desperate yet tantalizing offer. A covert transfer of company shares that would shift power comfortably back into my hands. The plan required impeccable timing. Patience was crucial, and I knew that Eli would never expect a direct challenge. As the meeting concluded, I watched the expressions of my peers as the news settled in. There was a sense of unease, a whisper of dissent running through the ranks. I could see Eli fidget, his confidence slipping, and for the first time, uncertainty sparked in his eyes. My heart surged with a feeling I had almost forgotten, the thrill of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. But that wasn't enough. Revenge was a feral beast, one that could not be sated with mere victories. It demanded satisfaction, a reckoning that would bring them to their knees. Next came the essential stage of creating dissent within the ranks of Eli's supporters. It was time for a subtle but effective approach, a way to instill doubt and destabilize Eli's power base from within. A series of anonymous tips outlining Eli's mismanagement and questionable ethics began circulating among my colleagues. I crafted the narrative carefully, ensuring it was believable yet veiled, so it couldn't be traced back to me. Information accessed from privileged channels fed the flames of this growing discontent. It was like watching a slow-moving avalanche, the tension escalating, ready to bury those who had thought themselves invincible. The shifts within the company hierarchy were swift and palpable. Rumblings of discontent ricocheted through our offices like a storm brewing on the horizon. Eli, the puppet master turned puppet, found his strings fraying as the very people he had sought to manipulate began taking a step back. My heart raced with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. I could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. I initiated further action by discreetly organizing back-to-back meetings with Eli's supposed loyalists, subtly planting seeds of doubt about his leadership. The rumors I had spread took root faster than I anticipated, and before I knew it, Eli's support began to erode like sand slipping through his fingers. The arrogance that had embedded itself in his demeanor started to wane, replaced with paranoia. It was beautiful watching him unravel, feeling the passing moments validate all my years of shame and humiliation. Then came the critical moment, the shareholders' meeting where Eli would present his grand vision for the future of the company. I knew his strategy relied heavily on negating my plans and convincing everyone I was a relic of the past, but reality had conspired against him. I crafted my speech like a weapon, aiming to cut through his deceit and expose his inadequacy to our shareholders. Every word was tinged with calculated malice, a deliberate attack designed to reclaim my place as the rightful leader. The day of the meeting arrived and tension gripped the air like a vice. Investors and stakeholders filled the boardroom. My mind raced as I approached the podium, recalling how many times I had stood in that same place. Except this was different. This time, I was there to claw back everything Eli had tried to steal from me, as well as the love and respect of my family that he had sought to destroy. I opened with an emotional anecdote about the history of our company, interweaving my family's legacy with its core values. I emphasized the importance of unity, loyalty, and ethics, principles Eli had violated in his quest for power. I could see him squirming in his seat, frustration etching itself across his face. The room was silent, hanging on to my every word. Power dynamics shifted ever so slightly. The audience, my former supporters, were contemplating their own beliefs and loyalties, and I had their rapt attention. As I launched into the crux of my speech, I detailed the corporate mismanagement that had plagued our company under Eli's care. I referenced the anonymous reports, the whispers I had heard. I painted a vivid picture of his failings, laying out a clear timeline of events that had led to our rapid decline. Each statistic was a dagger, each data point a testament to his incompetence. As I finished, the tension in the room was palpable. I could feel the air thick with anticipation. Eli rose to his feet to retaliate, but his bravado faltered with every word. It was as if the room had pressed him into a corner, and he could feel the scrutiny from his supporters slipping away. I could see that panic glinting in his eyes. This was not just a professional embarrassment, it was the demolition of everything he believed he'd built. The fallout came swiftly, like a tidal wave crashing down at high tide. As Eli launched into defensive tirades, more investors began to shift their loyalties, abandoning him one by one. The corporate hierarchy, once supportive of his incompetence, crumbled before my very eyes. It seemed only moments ago they were fawning over him, and now whispers flicked through the room, the air electrified with the possibility of change. What had only been potential betrayal of Eli soon evolved into collective realization. His leadership was not a birthright. It was merely a facade of deceit. By the end of that meeting, Eli's reign was over. The board decided almost unanimously, voting him out with a decisive majority. There it was, the irony that had been shaping my revenge transformed into something palpable. It was poetic justice. Eli was removed from the very position he had fought to deny me for so long. He was dragged into the shadows of corporate history, stripped of his titles, reduced to a mere footnote in a legacy that once belonged to our family. My heart raced as I relished that moment. But a part of me knew that this was just the beginning. I was riding the wave of justice, but I could still hear whispers of discontent. The collapse of Eli's support didn't only affect him, it rippled throughout the entire organization. Employees were in a frenzy, unsure of who to trust. Corporate morale plummeted, and I knew my work was far from finished. What had been a palace of confidence now looked like a sinking ship, taking everyone on board into the depths of uncertainty. As immediate chaos spread, I leaned into my newfound authority, instilling my vision for the future within the ranks. I held meetings with teams to reassure them and retain their loyalty, yet I could feel the lingering mistrust. I understood fully that the scar of Eli's betrayal would take more than a day to heal. It was crucial to focus on transparency, on rebuilding the connections that Eli's manipulation had severed. But even as I busied myself with meetings and discussions for the restructuring, I wouldn't forget the taste of his fall. Fueled by a potent mix of righteous fury and relief, I strategized ways to rectify not just the company, but my family dynamic as well. The corporate fallout had reached beyond mere finances. Family gatherings had turned into battlegrounds of words, the remnants of grievances and disappointments playing out across dinner tables. There was no easy path to restoring that, but with his defeat came a fresh chance to fetch my family from that abyss, a second chance at unity. Weeks turned into months as I took the pieces of a shattered organization and carefully rebuilt it from the ground up. Each day, I pored over financial reports, met with board members, and crafted strategies aimed at pushing the company forward, with the hope that my reforms would quiet any lingering echoes of discontent. I reinstated a commitment to core family values, a promise of familial loyalty and respect that had eroded in Eli's tenure. But the consequences of Eli's actions had sown seeds of division, both professionally and personally. Small ripples morphed into waves, causing repercussions that echoed beyond the corporate walls, even spilling into our home. My siblings were unsettled, some skeptical of my sudden rise from ashes, and tensions spiked every time we gathered. It was exhausting, trying to foster an environment of collaboration while rocketing upward as my reputation underwent a metamorphosis. Yet, as I navigated the corporate landscape, one looming question remained. How would I confront Eli? Somehow, I needed closure from his betrayal, along with the devastation it had inflicted, and the only way I could envision achieving that was through a heartfelt face-off. The opportunity arose when Eli reached out directly, requesting to meet for coffee. A wave of emotions crashed over me at both the proposal and that familiar voice, one that had echoed so many bittersweet memories. Curiosity and resentment mingled deep inside me, intertwining with the bittersweet taste of redemption I had come to savor over time. The meeting was set, and in that instant, I resolved not only to confront him, but also to extract the justice my heart still yearned for. I would not merely seek closure, I wanted him to recognize the weight of his actions, the consequences that had reverberated through our lives for so long. The chosen cafe was unassuming, nestled in a quaint corner of town, yet the atmosphere lay thick with anticipation as I entered. The tears of our former bond clouded my vision, but holding tight to my revenge, I reminded myself that I had the power now. Through the door, I found him seated by the window, an image I once loved morphed into a deceptive guise of remorse. He looked weary, time had not been kind, yet the essence of arrogance still lingered, buried beneath a weak facade. "It's been a while," he said, his voice faint as he attempted to carry on. "It seems that way," I replied coolly, letting the coldness of my tone hang in the air. "In the past, I thought I was doing the best for the company, for both of us." "But you weren't," I interrupted, leaning forward, eager to lay bare the gravity of his choices. "You sacrificed us all for your ambition, Eli. You disregarded the values we built this family on." I paused, feeling the warmth surge through me as I spoke the truth. "You tore us apart." At that moment, I saw him squirm again. He could no longer bask in the illusion of leadership. He faced judgment from someone entirely aware of the fallout of his ambition. The tables had turned, and now he bore the burden I had carried for years. There was a silence, a long moment where the unspoken truths hung between us like a drawbridge yet unreleased. He finally spoke, his voice softening, as if striving to maintain some remnant of dignity. "I see that now, but it was never about hurting you." "Wasn't it?" I demanded, leaning into the anger that simmered just beneath my surface. "You took everything from me. Your ambition blinded you. You made us enemies." His eyes reflected shadows of doubt, but also a flicker of understanding. The grip of his escapism loosened, and I could trace the flickering lights of regret. I'm sorry, he murmured, yet the apology felt feeble against the weight of our history. I took a deep breath, letting the years of pain flash before my eyes, the moments when laughter turned to silence, the love that had faded into resentment. Part of me craved vindication, but just then I realized that what I truly hungered for was healing. Our family had been consumed by a cycle of vengeance, and how easy it would be to let it continue spinning. But I wouldn't. I wouldn't descend into darkness again. You have to take responsibility, I said, steadying my voice. In your quest for control, you lost sight of who we are. The way out begins with honesty. Only when you recognize what you've lost can any of us start rebuilding. His expression shifted, possibly for the first time recognizing the fallout of our shared history. The shadows in his eyes began to lift. You're right. I failed you and I need to make it right. Can we try to fix this, to rebuild? For the first time since the betrayal, I felt something shift within me. Beneath layers of bitterness and calculation emerged a longing for healing, even a thread of hope. That depends, Eli, but it starts with being honest, both with yourself and the family. Through that encounter, I knew the landscape of our future remained uncertain, but I vowed to extend a hand, perhaps not a pact of undying loyalty, but rather a bridge back to our familial roots. The path ahead would demand dedication, but the notion of rebuilding something meaningful began to ease the burdens I had carried for too long. So with every step, I wove the threads of my revenge into a tapestry of family redemption, a chance to grow together despite the scars of betrayal. No longer would I let bitterness shape my reality. It was time to face the world anew, propelled forward by healing, resilience, and the remnants of love that might just remain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm hue over my home, my rightful domain, I finally felt a sense of clarity wash over me. The past months had been a whirlwind of chaos, confusion, and a profound sense of betrayal. Yet standing in the remnants of the tempest I had navigated, I could finally revel in the fruits of my labor. I had regained control, not only over my life, but over the very fabric that held my family together. It was a rise that had come at great cost, but one I wouldn't undo for anything. You see, the journey of vengeance I embarked upon was not merely about payback. It had been about reclaiming my identity and setting boundaries that had long been trampled upon by those who should have respected them. The years of silence, the weight of unspoken grievances, and the burden of unacknowledged sacrifices had finally found their voice, and I was that voice, a fierce, unwavering one. My family had always been intertwined with expectations, unending duties, and a relentless pursuit of their artificial notions of success. But in the wake of my orchestrated act of vengeance, the masks began to slip. The facade of unity crumbled, revealing insecurities and weaknesses that had festered beneath the surface. I had forced them to confront their truths, and with each confrontation, my empowerment grew stronger. I was no longer a passive participant in a game they designed. I was the architect of my own fate. As I navigated these new dynamics, I turned my attention inward, focusing on my own transformation. With each interaction that revealed the nature of my family, I worked diligently to reform the narrative woven around me. I was no longer just a mother or a daughter defined by others' expectations, but someone who could also redefine their course. One of the first reforms I enacted was the establishment of boundaries, clear, unwavering lines that delineated respect and dignity. No longer would I allow those closest to me to trample over my feelings without facing consequences. I began prioritizing my well-being, which surprisingly felt like an avant-garde practice within my family. During Sunday dinners, when the atmosphere typically brimmed with gloating and self-importance, I took the initiative to share my journey, a newly forged resilience that was rooted in my experience of betrayal and injustice. I spoke of my truth openly, recounting my sacrifices, the disrespect I had endured, and the lessons I had learned through my struggles. The revelations struck them, a jarring jolt to their general apathy. With each story, I planted seeds of awareness. Their shifting reactions revealed the cracks within their own beliefs and actions. Reforming my life and family dynamics also meant taking a stand against the favoritism that had long dictated family interactions. My efforts to expose this injustice didn't go unnoticed. One pivotal moment occurred at a holiday gathering when I recounted the unbalanced treatment my daughter received compared to their favorite cousin. Rather than adopting the usual silence, I made a case for the dignity my child deserved. For the first time, I saw the uncomfortable squirming in my family. It was as if I had finally pierced through the protective bubble of denial that encased them. As harsh as it was, I realized that vulnerability was my ally. Showing my emotional scars didn't weaken me, it showcased my resilience. In sharing my truths, I inspired change and initiated discussions that had long been sidelined. My family needed to reform as a unit, a collective evolution toward understanding, compassion, and genuine respect for one another's experiences. I gradually introduced dialogue sessions where we could express grievances, air out misunderstandings, and most importantly, listen to one another without the shadows of hostility or judgment. The empowerment I discovered through this process was more profound than I ever anticipated. It was as if I had awakened something dormant within me, a fire that had long been extinguished by years of neglect. I learned that empowerment is not simply a position of strength but a state of mind. It stemmed from knowing my worth, asserting my voice, and understanding that I was deserving of the same respect I willingly offered. With each passing day, I forged deeper connections with my family members who were willing to participate in this new era of honesty and vulnerability. In the wake of my rise, I also committed to fostering a healthier environment for future generations. I became increasingly involved in community outreach and support groups that addressed family dynamics marred by conflict and disunity. Sharing my narrative with others not only affirmed my healing process, but created a ripple effect, inviting others to do the same. I realized there are countless families trapped in their own cycles of misunderstanding and resentment. By sharing my experience, I could help others navigate their darkness and emerge into their light. Empowerment isn't solely an individual journey, it's a collective endeavor. As I offered my insights and counsel, I felt invigorated not just by my progress, but by witnessing others rise alongside me. The emotional bonds I constructed within my community echoed the strides I'd made with my family. Seed by seed, I cultivated an awareness of empathy that grew beyond walls.